I will never forget the sound of my name spoken with contempt. What is this unbearable old woman doing here? Get out immediately. My daughter-in-law Daniela's words still ring in my ears. They weren't just insults, they were knives wrapped in expensive perfume. She said it in front of everyone. Her mother, her father, her sister, her husband, and my own son Esteban, who lowered his gaze as if the shame belonged to me. I didn't respond. I just smiled. The calm kind of smile you learn after seeing too much. I stood there in the entrance of my own beach house, purse still hanging off my shoulder, and looked at the scene. My daughter-in-law's family drinking wine, laughing, using my crystal glasses and table linens, the ones I had kept safe since my husband passed away. Of course I'll leave, I said softly, without losing my smile. And I walked away. But not forever. That morning had been perfect until that moment. After a long, exhausting week, work, doctors, bills, I had decided to give myself a break. Nothing heals the soul like the sea, I told myself as I packed my bag. I took an early bus with my books, my straw hat, and a small piece of sweetbread for the road. The sky was clear, and I naively believed the weekend would belong to me. The beach house was my sanctuary. My husband and I had bought it over 30 years ago, back when he was still alive and dreams were simple. Waking up to the sound of waves, sipping coffee while gazing at the horizon, letting life pass without hurry. Every corner held a memory. The porch hammock where he used to read, the old blue dining lamp, the scent of wood and sea salt. It was more than a house, it was a piece of us. So when I opened the door and saw them all there, something inside me cracked. The foreign laughter, the unfamiliar voices, the plates that weren't theirs, everything felt like an invasion. Daniela was the first to see me. She wore a white dress and a wide-brimmed hat. She looked at me as if she had seen an unwanted ghost. "What are you doing here, Carmen?" she asked with a stiff smile. "I came to rest, just like everyone else." "It's my house," I replied. "Your house?" she repeated mockingly. I thought it belonged to Esteban. My son said nothing. He only shrugged. And then she shouted, "What is this unbearable old woman doing here? Leave immediately." The air grew thick. The laughter stopped. Her mother pretended not to hear. Her father stared at the sea. Her sister quietly poured herself more wine. Esteban looked at me, speechless. I took a deep breath, put my keys away, lowered my bag, and said in a calm voice, "Don't worry, Daniela. I'm leaving." The way I said it surprised them, because it wasn't resignation. It was the calm of someone who knows that the hardest blows are not returned with noise, but with strategy. I walked out without looking back. I headed to the shore. The waves were gentle. The sky glowed with that orange tint that only appears at sunset. I took off my shoes and let the cool sand embrace my feet. As I walked, I thought about my husband. He used to say, "Carmen, people confuse humility with weakness. But remember, the tides always retreat before they strike." And I remembered his words as if he were whispering them in my ear. But before we continue, I'd like to know, have you subscribed to the channel? Did you enjoy the story? Your support helps me keep sharing these moments with you. Now let's continue. I sat on a rock and stared at the horizon. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sea in shades of copper. I closed my eyes and let the wind tousle my hair. I didn't cry, I couldn't. Tears are a luxury a woman like me no longer allows herself. I thought about how we had reached this point, how my son, the child who slept in my arms when his father died, had become a man who lowered his head as his wife humiliated me. I remembered when I bought him his first pair of leather shoes, when I helped him pay for college by selling my engagement ring, when I celebrated his wedding with a heart full of hope, believing he would finally have someone who would care for him as much as I always had. What a cruel irony. I gave him wings to fly, and he chose to soar over my silence. I stayed there, staring at the sea until nightfall. The lights of my house were visible in the distance, shining cheerfully as if nothing had happened. And in that moment, I understood. I wouldn't cry, I wouldn't argue, I wouldn't beg. I would act. I stood, brushed the sand from my skirt, and walked to a small inn nearby. The owner, a warm, smiling woman with dark skin, offered me a room. "Are you here alone?" she asked. "Yes," I replied. "But that doesn't mean I'm alone." That night, I slept deeply as the sound of the sea tapped against the windows. I felt a different kind of calm. It wasn't resignation, it was purpose. Because when a woman like me says, I'm leaving, it doesn't mean she's giving up. It means her return will be unforgettable. Sometimes silence isn't born from fear. It comes from the exhaustion of speaking to someone who doesn't want to listen. That night, in the small inn room, with the sound of the sea gently touching the walls, I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Gray threads in her hair, wrinkles left by battles won, and eyes that still held a spark nothing had been able to extinguish. I was Carmen Velasquez, 60 years old, a widow since 42, mother of one, a woman who had given everything and received very little in return. When I married Julio, I was only 20. He was a hard-working man, skin tanned by the sun, with a smile that could calm any storm. Together, we built a life from scratch. I remember our first nights in that tiny shack with a zinc roof, where the rain would leak through. We slept wrapped in each other's arms, laughing at everything we didn't have, dreaming of the day we would buy a house by the sea. And that day finally came. Years of sacrifice, selling food, washing other people's clothes, saving coins like they were diamonds, until we could buy that beach house. It wasn't big, but it was ours. Every brick carried the weight of our dreams. Julio used to say, "This house will be our refuge, Carmen. When we're old, we'll come here to listen to the sea and tell the same stories over and over." But he never got the chance. A sudden road accident took him on an ordinary night, leaving me with a 10-year-old boy and a grief so deep it felt like I couldn't breathe. I remember staring at the sea, begging God to explain why he took away the only man who loved me unconditionally. But the sea, as always, stayed silent. So I had to go on. I worked day and night, raised my son with every ounce of love I had left. I promised myself I'd never rely on anyone again. And more than anything, I swore that house would always stay mine. As time passed, Esteban grew up. He was a noble, intelligent boy, but too trusting. I watched him study, work hard, and my heart swelled with pride. When he got his first job, I cried. When he introduced me to Daniela, I smiled, though something inside me tightened. She was beautiful, no doubt, but her beauty carried a kind of arrogance disguised as elegance. She had that look, the kind that measures people by the weight of their wallets, not the value of their hearts. Still, I tried to accept her. That's what mothers do. We swallow our suspicions with a smile so we don't lose our children. At first, everything seemed fine. But slowly, I noticed Esteban changing. His visits became less frequent, his calls shorter, and whenever he came, he carried an invisible rush. "Mama, Daniela isn't comfortable when you're around so much. She needs her space. But it's my house, son." "I know, but it's ours now, too." Ours. That word hurt more than any insult. Not because I didn't want to share, but because I realized I was already being erased. From then on, I became a guest in my own home. I stayed quiet when Daniela made sarcastic comments. I smiled when she corrected me in public. I pretended not to hear when she called me old-fashioned or a burden. I never shouted, never argued, just watched. And while she thought she was weakening me, I was learning. I learned her gestures, her looks, the methods she used to manipulate Esteban. I learned that real power doesn't belong to those who scream. It belongs to those who know how to wait. Once, my neighbor told me, "Carmen, you have the patience of a saint." And I responded, "It's not patience. It's calculation." Because when a woman like me stays silent, it's not out of fear. It's because she's measuring the exact blow. That night in the inn, I opened my old folder of documents. When I walked in, he looked up and smiled. "Dona Carmen, what a pleasure to see you. Everything all right?" "That depends on what you consider all right, Marcos," I replied, placing the folder on his desk. "I need to talk about my house." His expression changed. "Is there a problem with the property?" "Yes, it's occupied by people I didn't invite." He nodded, not surprised. "And the deed is in my name," I added firmly. Marcos opened the documents and reviewed them silently, nodding from time to time. "Everything is legally in order. No one else appears as owner." "Perfect. And what would you like to do, Dona Carmen?" "Nothing the law wouldn't allow," I said, staring him straight in the eyes. But I want the surprise to be educational. Marcos allowed himself a small smile. Just like your husband. Always dignified, even when settling accounts. Julio taught me well, I replied. We agreed on the steps. He would notify the local authorities that anyone in the house who wasn't me should be considered an unauthorized occupant. There would be no scandal, no shouting, no violence, just a quiet, cold, legal action. Like a tide rising, unnoticed until it's too late. When I left the office, I walked to the pier. The wind was strong, carrying the sharp smell of salt. I sat on a bench and watched the waves. I thought of Daniela, her cutting voice, her arrogant laughter. I didn't hate her. Hatred was pointless. Women like her are not born cruel. They become that way when they mistake power for control. What I felt was pity. Pity for someone who didn't know that a wounded woman's politeness can be her most elegant sentence. I pulled out my phone and dialed the local police. Good afternoon, I said. This is Carmen Velasquez, the lady of the house in Bahia Escondida. Of course, ma'am, the voice on the other end replied. I'd like to make a formal statement. Has there been an incident? The officer asked. Not yet, I replied, but there will be tomorrow. He remained silent for a few seconds. Would you like us to send a patrol, ma'am? Just make sure you're nearby and that everyone understands clearly who the owner is. The rest will resolve itself. That afternoon, I returned to the inn. The owner saw me walk in with a curious smile. You look different today, Dona Carmen. Yes, I replied, like someone who already knows the wind is about to change. I laughed softly. Maybe it already has. I went up to my room, opened the window, and let the sea air in. On the horizon, the sun slowly sank into the water, as if the day were surrendering with elegance. And I thought, that's exactly what Daniela would do soon. Surrender, even if she tried to hide it. Before sleeping, I wrote in my notebook, life has a curious way of giving things back. Sometimes it's not by shouting or taking revenge with rage. Sometimes you just have to show them they underestimated the wrong person. I closed the notebook, turned off the light, and smiled. Tomorrow, my silence would speak, and it would do so with the voice of the sea. The phone rang at 7 a.m., just as the ocean began to glow with the first sunlight. I wasn't surprised. When you've lived long enough, you learn to recognize the exact moment guilt comes calling. I looked at the number and smiled. It was her, Daniela. I answered calmly, like someone expecting a visitor. Good morning, dear. On the other end, an awkward silence, followed by a voice dripping with fake sweetness. Senora Carmen, you gave us such a scare yesterday. We thought something had happened to you. Oh, really? I said calmly. How thoughtful. I must have missed that, right when you were asking me to disappear from my own house. Silence. I could hear her swallow. It was a misunderstanding. You know how I am. Sometimes I speak without thinking. Yes, I know, I said. And I also know how to listen without forgetting. The tension could have been sliced with a knife. We wanted to invite you for breakfast, Esteban added. He's worried. He didn't sleep well. Don't worry, dear, I replied, in a voice so gentle it almost hurt. I didn't sleep badly either. The air at the inn is cleaner than in an invaded house. Another silence, then a shift in tone. The inn. You're in town? Yes, near the pier. I'll stay a few days. I don't want to bother. You're not bothering, Senora. Please come back. That's also your home. I laughed softly. Thank you, Daniela. But don't worry. Very soon, the house will be mine again. The line went silent. Before she could speak, I ended the call. I walked out to the balcony of the inn and watched the waves crash against the rocks. The sea doesn't roar when it drags things away. It does so in silence. That was my revenge. No shouting, no rage, no theatrics. Mid-morning, I went back to Marcos Duarte's office. He was waiting with a new folder and that calm look of someone who already knows how things will end. Everything's ready, Dona Carmen, he said. The notice has been sent to the municipal authorities. They'll inspect the illegal occupation today. What time? I asked. Around noon. I nodded. Perfect. No rush. Just make sure they arrive after the lunch is served. The surprise will be complete. The lawyer tried not to smile. Sometimes your calm scares me, Dona Carmen. It's not calm, Marcos. It's memory. I signed the documents without hesitation. Every stroke of my pen was a silent declaration that a woman can speak softly and still be unbreakable in purpose. On the way back to the inn, I ordered a coffee. The owner, her curious eyes watching me carefully, said, "You look lighter today, Carmen." When the soul shakes off the dust of humiliation, even the body breathes differently. I turned on the dining room radio, and as the music filled the air, I remembered something Julio used to say. True strength isn't shouting louder. It's speaking when everyone expects your silence. I smiled. It was time to speak. At 11:30, the phone rang again. This time it was Esteban. His voice was trembling, a mix of confusion and anxiety. "Mama, why did you leave like that?" "Daniela is feeling remorseful. She wants to apologize." "Apologies, son, are not made over the phone. They're built through actions. Please come back. This is getting out of control." "No, son. What got out of control was respect. And believe me, that's not something you fix with flowers or sweet words." He fell silent for a few seconds. "What are you going to do, Mom?" "Nothing," I replied. "Just let the truth knock on the door." "What does that mean?" "It means that in a few minutes, you'll understand what it's like to have a mother who learned how to wait." And I hung up. The clock struck 12 when I heard the sirens in the distance. They weren't loud, just a faint hum like a promise. I knew the patrol was already on its way to the beach house. I didn't feel guilt. I felt justice. For years I had stayed quiet, accepted scraps of affection, and endured dismissive gestures. But there's something time never erases: dignity. And today, at last, mine was standing tall. I spent the rest of the afternoon writing in my notebook. People think revenge destroys, but in truth, it rebuilds. It gives you back the breath they stole, the voice they silenced, the gaze they forced downward. Not all acts of justice need an audience. Sometimes it's enough to know the universe took note. That night I slept deeply, no anxiety, no anger. I knew the dawn would bring a new order. And when I stepped foot in that house again, no one would dare raise their voice, because when the sea returns, it doesn't ask permission. The sun had barely risen when I left the inn. The air smelled like salt and the dust of justice. Each step on the sand brought me closer not just to my house, but to my story, to the woman I used to be and the one I was becoming again. In the distance, I saw the blue roof of the house, the same one Julio and I painted one summer afternoon, laughing like children while the wind stole our brush and time seemed endless. Now that roof looked different. It wasn't my refuge yet, but it was no longer their fortress. I walked slowly, bag on my shoulder and the signed document folder under my arm. At the door, 2 police officers stood chatting by a patrol truck. When they saw me, one of them straightened up. "Mrs. Carmen Velasquez?" he asked. "The very same," I replied. The officer nodded. The procedure was carried out without incident. "The house is empty." "Empty?" I asked. "Yes, ma'am. Your son and your daughter-in-law's family were notified and left about an hour ago." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. What I felt wasn't joy, but an old, heavy calm. The kind of calm that smells like truth. I walked inside. Silence greeted me with open arms. No laughter, no shouting, no clinking glasses. Only the echo of my steps across the tiled floor. The dining room was a mess, plates still on the table, crumpled tablecloths, empty glasses. The couch was stained with shoe marks and someone else's perfume. But all of that was superficial. The soul of the house, the part that belonged to me, was still there, untouched. I walked to the cabinet in the living room and traced my fingers over the frame, holding Julio's photo. His smile seemed to look back at me with pride. "I did it, old man," I whispered. "No one will ever tell me to disappear from my own home again." The wind slipped in through the window and moved the curtains as if he were answering. A few moments later, I heard a car stop outside. I recognized the sound of the engine. It was Esteban's. He came in alone. Daniela wasn't with him. His face trembled with shame and disbelief. "Mom," he said, his eyes wet. "What did you do?" "What I had to do, take back what's mine." But they took them out in front of everyone. It was humiliating. And do you think what I went through wasn't, son? Do you think it wasn't humiliating when your wife told me to disappear, and you just lowered your head? Esteban opened his mouth but said nothing. He just looked down, as if my words weighed on his shoulders. Mom, I didn't want this to happen. You didn't want it, but you allowed it, I answered calmly. And that hurts more than any insult. He rubbed his face with both hands. Daniela is furious. She says she won't come back. Well, then she's finally done something right, I replied with a faint smile. He looked at me, puzzled. Doesn't this hurt you, Mom? Of course it does, Esteban. But there are pains we embrace because they come with dignity. I walked over to the sideboard and pulled out an envelope. It was the one Julio had left for me before he died. I looked up at my son. Your father left this for me. He asked me to open it only when I felt our house was no longer a home. I opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a letter written in Julio's strong, loving handwriting. Carmen, if one day the love in our home turns into noise, remember that you are the soul of this place. No one has the right to make you feel like a guest under your own roof. This house belongs to you, not just on paper, but through the sacrifice, the sleepless nights, and the tears that built its foundations. If anyone forgets that, remind them with dignity, not with anger, but with the quiet strength of the sea. Esteban read in silence, his lips pressed together. By the time he finished, tears were streaming down his cheeks. Dad knew, he whispered. Yes, and that's why he left me the last word. I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. This house was built with love, Esteban, not arrogance. I know, Mom. Then understand this well. Respect isn't demanded by shouting. It stands tall, even when everyone wants to see you fall. He nodded. We stepped out onto the porch together, unable to speak. The sea was calm, and the breeze moved the leaves of the old lemon tree. I don't know if Daniela and I will ever speak again after this, he said softly. That depends on whether she's ready to learn what you're learning today. And what am I learning? That a mother can forgive anything, except being forgotten. He looked at me in silence, and for the first time in many years, I saw the child I had raised, not the confused man, not the manipulated husband, but the son who still remembered who his mother was. When he left, the house fell silent again, but this time it wasn't the silence of abandonment. It was the silence of rebirth. I opened all the windows, swept away the remains of someone else's dinner, changed the tablecloths, and turned on the radio. An old song, Julio's favorite, began to play. As the sea air drifted through the living room, I knew I had done it. I hadn't just taken back a house. I had reclaimed my voice, my story, my place. And if one day Daniela returned, I wouldn't need to raise my voice or seek revenge. All I'd have to do was look her in the eye and say, I warned you I was leaving, but I never said I wouldn't return. Night fell over the house like a silent blessing. The waves crashed softly on the shore, and the air smelled of damp wood, the scent of the past, of a home restored. I sat on the sofa with the lamp still on, holding the envelope I had opened earlier that morning with Esteban. I knew there was more inside. Julio never did things halfway. I took a small knife and carefully opened the hidden flap at the bottom of the envelope. A second paper slipped out, folded many times, yellowed, its ink slightly blurred by the years. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. I recognized his handwriting immediately. Firm, elegant, always carrying that mix of tenderness and authority. Carmen, if you're reading this, it means life has tested you once again. If you are alone, I want you to remember this. You were not made to ask for permission in your own home. This house is yours, and I say that not just out of love, but by right. Here is my will. Everything we own, our savings, our land, our house, and our belongings will pass fully under your name with no conditions. The only thing I ask is that you never allow respect for you to become a currency to be traded. My eyes blurred with tears. Julio had always been a man of his word, and now, even from beyond time, he was still protecting me like he always had. If someday our son forgets who gave him shelter, do not curse him. Teach him as only you know how, with no shouting, no bitterness, but with the strength of your example. Because respect that isn't taught with love, life teaches with loss. I folded the letter gently and pressed it to my chest. For a moment, I felt Julio standing beside me. That serene smile he always wore whenever things unfolded exactly as he had foreseen. I stepped into the patio and looked at the ocean. The moon reflected on the water like a lamp hanging from the sky. The breeze moved the porch curtains, and for a moment I could almost see Julio sitting there, waiting for me like he used to. "We did it, old man," I whispered. "Your house is safe. Our story, too." The air seemed to warm, as if the universe had exhaled. The next morning, I went to see the lawyer, Marcos Duarte, with the will in my hand. His expression changed the moment he saw it. "Where did you find this, Mrs. Carmen?" "Julio hid it in the envelope," I said. "He knew I'd find it when the time was right." The lawyer nodded slowly. "Your husband was a wise man. With this document, there's no doubt the property is entirely yours. No one can contest it." "I never wanted a fight, Marcos," I replied. "Just respect. And you earned it." He smiled proudly, the kind of pride that few can carry without getting their hands dirty. I nodded. He always used to say that true justice doesn't make noise. When I returned home, the sea was calm. The silence no longer hurt. Now it kept me company. I made myself a coffee, opened the windows, and let the scent of salt and wind fill the dining room. Suddenly I heard footsteps. It was Esteban. His face looked tired, his eyes swollen, and in his hands he held a bouquet of white flowers. "Mom," he said with a hoarse voice, "I wanted to see you." "Come in, son. This is still your home." He sat across from me. "I've been thinking all night," he began. "I don't know how I allowed Daniela to treat you like that. Sometimes love blinds us." "Esteban," I said softly, "do you forgive me?" I looked him straight in the eyes. "Always. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without pain." I took out the second letter and handed it to him. "Read it. It's your father's voice." I watched as he read. His expression crumbled with every line. When he finished, he looked up, eyes full of unshed tears. "Dad knew this would happen." "Yes," I said, "and he left me with the responsibility to remind you." Esteban rubbed his face, trying to hold back the tears. "I don't deserve this house." "No, son," I replied gently. "You don't deserve it yet, but you can earn it again." "How?" he asked, voice trembling. "Not with money or gifts. With time. With presence. With respect. I'll do that, Mom. I promise you." I held his hand and squeezed it tenderly. That's the only promise I ever wanted to hear. That afternoon, after he left, I opened the letter again and wrote on the back, "Julio, our son has returned. Not perfect, but repentant. The house still stands. So do I. Your voice continues to guide me, and now I understand what you meant. Love without respect is just a roof with no foundation." I placed the paper in the drawer, next to my rings and a photo of us on the beach. The sun was setting, and its golden light poured into the room. I closed my eyes and smiled. For the first time in a long time, everything felt like it was finally in its place. The past, the present, the pain, the dignity, everything had settled. And then I thought, the sea rarely returns what it takes, but when it does, it's because it considers it worthy. 3 weeks passed since that morning when Esteban arrived at my door, tears in his eyes and flowers in his hands. Since then, the silence between us had changed. It was no longer a painful distance, but a necessary pause. He came to see me every day, not out of duty but affection. He helped me paint the railings, fix the windows, and often sat on the porch staring at the sea without saying a word, as if trying to understand at what point in his life he stopped listening to me. I didn't demand anything from him. I didn't ask about Daniela, nor say her name. I'd learned that some wounds don't need to be reopened with reproaches, they heal with presence. Sometimes, at sunset, I'd see him staring at the empty hammock where his father once sat. And in those moments, I realized the true punishment for a son isn't guilt. It's the echo of the words he didn't say in time. One afternoon, while watering the garden, I heard a car engine stop outside. I wasn't expecting visitors. The air shifted. I knew before I saw her. That scent, that rushed way of closing the car door, that impatient tapping of heels against the gravel. It was her, Daniela. She walked toward the entrance wearing a light dress and sunglasses that covered half her face. She carried a handbag hooked over her arm and wore an expression suspended between pride and desperation. I stood still, holding the watering can, watching her approach. Inside, I felt an unexpected calm. There was no anger left, no resentment, just an emotional distance that looked a lot like freedom. "Mrs. Carmen," she said as soon as she saw me, removing her sunglasses. "Daniela," I replied without moving. What a surprise. "I know I'm not welcome, but I had to come." "That's true. You're not welcome," I answered in a composed tone. "But since you're here, speak." She froze for a moment, lowering her gaze, breathing deeply, as if searching for words she couldn't find. "I made a mistake," she finally said. "Many. I was wrong about you, about Esteban, about everyone. I didn't measure my words that day. I wasn't well." "You weren't well," I repeated slowly, almost with irony. "That's what people say when the damage is already done. But tell me, dear, what really brings you here? Remorse or fear?" Her lips trembled. She didn't respond right away. She took a few steps toward the porch and stopped at the open door, looking inside the house. Her voice cracked when she spoke. "I came to ask for your forgiveness." That sentence, once powerful, now sounded distant, hollow. I watched her closely. She had changed. The arrogant shine in her eyes was gone. She no longer stood like she owned the world. There was something different now, exhaustion, perhaps defeat, maybe even humanity. I set the watering can aside and invited her in. "Come in, Daniela. If you're going to apologize, do it under a roof, not under the sun." She stepped inside slowly, looking around as though she were entering a museum. The house was spotless. It smelled of fresh bread and coffee. The curtains swayed with the sea breeze, and the sound of the waves drifted in like a steady breath. She sat at the dining table, the same place she used to sit when she was still pretending to be polite. I sat across from her. "Esteban told me everything," she said with her head lowered. "The letter from your husband, the will, the deed, everything. I didn't know the house was only in your name." "You didn't need to know," I replied. "Respect isn't earned through documents, it's earned through behavior." Daniela slowly nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "Forgive me, Carmen. I'm truly sorry. I haven't slept in weeks. Esteban left. He says he needs time, that he doesn't want to see me. I love him, and I don't know how to fix this. I thought if I came here, if I spoke to you, maybe I could start over." I listened without interrupting. "And why do you think I should help you fix what you destroyed?" I asked. She swallowed. "Because you know what it is to love, Mrs. Carmen, and I didn't. That made me look down, not out of pity but reflection." She was right. I didn't know what it was to love. I loved my husband with devotion. I loved my son with every fiber of my being. And I knew what it felt like to be poorly loved. That was something Daniela had never understood. Until now. "Love isn't possession, Daniela," I said. "It's care. It's respect for the other person's space, their history, their roots. What you did wasn't love. It was control dressed as affection." My voice was more stern than I expected, but I didn't soften it. "I didn't shout at you that day because I knew life would do it for me. And as you can see, it did." She covered her face with her hands and sobbed. Not the wounded pride kind of crying, but the kind that comes when you finally see yourself without makeup. "I don't want you to hate me," she whispered. "I don't hate you," I replied. "Hate would give you a place in my heart, and you no longer have one." We sat in silence for a long time. The wind moved the curtains, and a seagull cried in the distance. Daniela took a deep breath and said, "I didn't just come to apologize. I came to ask you for a favor." "A favor?" I raised an eyebrow. "How curious. I need to see Esteban. He won't answer my calls. I know he comes here. I just want to speak with him once. I don't want to disturb his process. I just want to see him." Her eyes pleaded in a way her words couldn't. I thought of my son, of his face when we read Julio's letter together, of the peace he was slowly reclaiming. I didn't want anything to interrupt that, but I also knew that forgiveness given wisely doesn't weaken. It teaches. "He'll be here this afternoon," I finally said. "But don't expect things to be like before." "I don't," she said, her voice unsteady. "I just want to tell him the truth." It was almost 6 when Esteban arrived. He walked in without knowing Daniela was waiting. When he saw her, he froze. "What are you doing here?" he asked, with a mix of surprise and irritation. "I came to apologize," she replied, standing up. You didn't have to, he said coldly. I already learned there are things even an apology can't fix. I quietly stepped aside, standing near the window. I didn't want to interfere. Sometimes love needs to break in front of witnesses, to either be reborn or die for good. Daniela stepped toward him. I'm not here to justify myself. I'm here to tell you I lost everything. I'm alone now. You didn't do that for me, Esteban said. You did it for yourself. But I appreciate the effort. She took a breath. I was unfair to your mother, Esteban, and to you too. I couldn't stand the way she existed in your life as something sacred because I never learned how to care without controlling. I thought love was measured in power, not in respect. I was wrong. Too late, he said. Maybe, she whispered. But I needed to say it. I watched them from the corner. Daniela was shattered. Esteban, on the other hand, looked whole. Life, I thought, always settles its debts. Esteban, I intervened softly. Forgiveness isn't a door you open or close. Sometimes it's just a window that lets new air in. You don't have to love someone again to let go of the weight of resentment. He nodded slowly, his eyes still fixed on her. I forgive you, Daniela, he finally said. But that doesn't mean we'll go back to who we were. I don't want that, she replied. I just needed to hear it. They embraced briefly, not with passion, but with a mature, resigned sadness. When she left, silence returned, and the sound of the ocean filled everything. That night, Esteban stayed with me on the terrace. He stared at the stars, and his voice sounded more peaceful than ever. Mom, he said, I think I finally understand what you always tried to teach me. And what was that, son? That you have to know when to stay, but also when to leave. I smiled. Exactly. Daniela left a different person. Life changes us all, Esteban. Sometimes regret is the only school that works. We stayed quiet. The sea seemed to speak for us. Then I looked at him and said softly, Your father would be proud of you. And you too, Mom. Yes, son. Because you learned the most important lesson. Love isn't measured by words. It's measured by how we care for what we love. He hugged me. His embrace was warm, sincere, free of guilt. And for the first time in a long time, I could rest my heart. That night, before I slept, I opened my journal and wrote. Regret doesn't erase the past, but it can give it meaning. Daniela learned that you don't raise your voice in a house you didn't help build. Esteban learned that respect isn't inherited, it's earned. And I learned that forgiveness isn't given out of compassion, but out of self-love. I turned off the light, lay down, and listened to the steady breathing of the waves. The house breathed with me. It no longer hurt, no longer weighed, it was just peace. And in that peace, I understood that the sea always returns what you're brave enough to release without hate. The sunrise that morning had that golden color that only appears after a storm. The air was fresh, and the breeze carried the scent of salt and freshly brewed coffee. I woke up early, not because I had something urgent to do, but because when the body finds peace, it no longer needs as much rest. The house was silent, not the old, lonely silence, but a warm, human silence. I walked barefoot down the hallway, my fingertips brushing the walls that once witnessed my solitude. Now every corner seemed to breathe with me. I opened the windows, and the sound of the sea entered like a blessing. The wind moved the white curtains, and for a moment, I thought I heard Julio's laughter, deep and effortless, filling the room. I closed my eyes, and I felt he was still there, in every breeze, in every sunbeam that touched the wooden floor. Almost a month had passed since Daniela's last visit. I hadn't heard from her again, and didn't need to. Esteban told me she had decided to move to another city, to start over. I wished her well, sincerely. I held no grudge. I had learned that forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's refusing to remain a prisoner of the pain. Daniela had paid her price, and the silence she left behind was part of the balance life demands. Sometimes, for something to breathe, something else has to fade away. Esteban, on the other hand, came back to me like the tide returning to shore. Not all at once, but gently. He came every weekend, sometimes with flowers, other times with food he'd cooked himself. But most of all, he brought time. Time to keep me company, to share silences, to rebuild the ties that his absence had once frayed. We no longer spoke about the past, because we both knew there was nothing left to explain. It was enough to look at each other and know that despite everything, we were still here, mother and son, reconstructing what life had tried to break. One Sunday afternoon, while preparing a stew, he said, "Mom, do you know what my therapist told me? That there are houses that only breathe when someone finally learns to open the windows." I smiled as I stirred the pot. "Then that must be why this house finally breathes again," I replied, "because no one fills it with noise anymore." He looked at me silently and hugged me from behind, like he used to when he was a child. "I swear, Mom," he said, "I'll never let anyone make you feel out of place again." I caressed his hands. "Don't swear it, son. Prove it by living it. Promises spoken aloud are carried away by the wind, but actions, they put down roots." That night, we ate on the porch. The sky was clear, and the stars seemed to hang low over the sea. I lit a small candle on the table. "For your father," I said. Esteban nodded. "And for you, Mom, for not giving up." "I didn't give up," I replied, gazing at the sea. "I just learned that some battles are won by leaving at the right time." We fell quiet, watching the waves. Every now and then, a soft breeze brought the scent of jasmine, the same one Julio had planted by the gate. It felt like the whole place had regained its soul. A week later, the lawyer, Marcos Duarte, came to visit. He entered carrying a folder under his arm and the same discreet smile as always. "Mrs. Carmen," he said as he stepped inside, "I have good news. The property registry has been updated. Everything is in order. The house is officially listed under your name, with no objections and now protected as family heritage. No one will ever be able to touch it again." "Thank you, Marcos," I said as I poured him a cup of coffee. Julio would be happy. He was wiser than I ever realized. "And so are you," he replied. "Not everyone knows how to claim what's theirs without destroying what they love in the process." We sat on the terrace, staring out at the sea. "And your son?" he asked. "He's learning to be a man again," I said. "And that's enough for me." Marcos smiled as he stood. "Then my work here is done. But yours, Mrs. Carmen, is just beginning." "Mine?" I asked, surprised. "Yes, you have a story to tell, and there are many women who need to hear it." His words stayed with me that night. I couldn't sleep. I thought of all the women I had known in my life, the ones who kept quiet out of fear, the ones who gave up what was theirs in the name of love, the ones who mistook patience for resignation. I wondered how many of them had wished to hear a voice tell them they weren't alone. I got up, went to my desk, and opened my notebook. I began to write not about revenge or betrayal, but about dignity. I wrote what I had learned from Julio, from Esteban, from loss, from forgiveness. I wrote about what it meant to belong to myself again. The words flowed like the sea finally finding its course. And I realized I wasn't writing for me. I was writing for all of us. Don't let them push you out of the house you built. And I'm not just talking about walls, I'm talking about you. Because there are women who are houses themselves. They hold, protect, shelter, but when wounded, they also know how to close themselves in to heal. I closed the notebook with tears in my eyes, not of sorrow but of gratitude. The days that followed felt gentle, as if time itself needed to rest. The ocean was calm at dawn, seagulls flew low, and the garden flowers grew stronger than ever. Sometimes neighbors came to visit. Other days, women from the village stopped by. They had heard some of my story, and many looked at me with respect. Some stayed for tea. They told me about their problems, their children, their fears. And without realizing it, my house became what Julio once dreamed of, a refuge. One afternoon, one of them, a young woman named Lucia, a single mother, said to me, "Mrs. Carmen, when I grow old, I want to have your calm." I smiled. Calm doesn't come with age, my dear. It comes when you stop needing others to understand you in order to find peace. Time continued its course and the wounds healed. Esteban found a new job, and slowly his smile regained its light. He would visit with his son, my grandson, a little boy of 5 who resembled him so much as a child that sometimes it hurt to look at him. One afternoon, the boy ran toward me with a drawing in his hand. "Grandma, look," he said. "I drew your house." It was a clumsy but beautiful drawing, the sea, the sun, the flowers, and a woman with white hair at the door. "And who is that?" I asked. "You," he said, laughing. But I made you big because you're the owner of the sea. I hugged him so tightly my hands trembled. In his innocence, that child had spoken the purest truth. I was the owner of the sea, not because I possessed it, but because I had learned to navigate it. That night, as the moon rose over the horizon, I sat alone on the porch with a cup of tea. The air was warm, and the sound of the waves reached me like a slow heartbeat. I looked at the sky and whispered softly, as if Julio could hear me. You know, old man, I think I did it. I didn't just recover the house. I recovered something far more important, myself. The wind blew gently, and a leaf fell into my lap. It was from the lemon tree he had planted. I held it between my fingers and smiled. The sea seemed brighter than ever. This house breathes again, Julio, and every corner carries your name. But the most beautiful thing is that by opening the windows, I learned to breathe again too. Before going to sleep, I left the doors open so the sea air could flow through the hallways. The moonlight entered through the windows, illuminating photographs, books, and memories. Everything seemed different. It wasn't the house that had changed, it was me. I rested my head on the pillow and reflected on all the stages of my life. The young woman in love, the resilient widow, the patient mother, the humiliated woman, the silent strategist, the survivor, and now the teacher. All of them lived inside me, together forming the strongest home I had ever built. I closed my eyes and whispered a final prayer before sleep. May no woman ever have to be expelled from her own home to remember that it was always hers. The sea responded with a murmur, as if approving my words. And as dawn painted the sky golden once again, I knew that Carmen Velasquez's house was more than just a structure by the sea. It was a symbol for all women who were once called old, useless, or a nuisance, and who, quietly, learned to build empires from the remains of their dignity. Because when a woman decides to stand up, the whole house and the world rises with her. They say time heals all wounds. I don't believe it. Time doesn't heal, it teaches. And when you learn, pain stops hurting and becomes a lesson. That's what happened to me. For many years, I believed that love meant enduring, staying silent, tolerating, that being a mother meant remaining still even when your soul screamed, that patience was a virtue even when it became a chain. Today I know the truth. Love without respect is a prison, and enforced silence leaves deeper scars than any harsh word. I forgave Daniela, not because she deserved it, but because I needed to release the weight of her offense. I forgave my son because a mother's love does not surrender, it transforms. And I forgave myself for taking so long to stand up. Because no one teaches you how to defend yourself without yelling, to leave without fleeing, to reclaim without taking revenge. But one day comes the inevitable day when a woman looks in the mirror and realizes she no longer needs permission to exist. Today, when I open my windows and let the sea in, I feel that I am letting life in too. Remembering no longer hurts. I am no longer afraid of being alone because I have learned that solitude is not absence. It is space, a sacred space where you can find yourself again, rebuild, and reconcile with everything you were. And if any woman listening to my story is going through something similar, I want her to hear me clearly. You are not invisible, you are not replaceable, and you are not alone. Your value does not depend on who recognizes you, but on who you are when no one is watching. So rise up, gather your pieces, your memories, your broken dreams, and start again, not to prove anything to anyone, but to return to yourself. Respect is not begged for, it is upheld. And dignity, when lost, can always be regained, even if it takes tears. I did it. And if I could, so can you. Tell me in the comments which city you are watching from. I'd love to know how far these words reach. Like this story if it touched your heart, and subscribe to the channel to continue sharing in stories like this. Stories of life, of strength, of women who, like you and me, learned to stand up when everything seemed over. Because in the end, we are all houses by the sea, sometimes battered by the waves, sometimes empty but always ready to breathe again.